Powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Now, live from inside the Matt Black Kia Studios. This is Football at 4.
Football at 4 is powered by the Inside the Birds podcast, and it is brought to you locally by Caesars Entertainment Group of Atlantic City. Come experience the ultimate sports destination all season long. Wild Wild West, Tropicana, Harrah's Resort, Atlantic City. Book your game day experience today at Caesars.com. I'm Mike Gill. This is the Sports Bash Live on 97.3 ESPN and Football at 4 today. Geoff Mosher, of course, from the Inside the Birds podcast, set to join me here in just a second as we take a look at the Eagles at the bye week, what's going on with them, and, of course, some of the news around this team. I want to get Geoff's thoughts on, obviously, what is the big question moving forward. Not really a big question. We know Jalen Hurts is going to be the starter. But there was some reports over the weekend that the Eagles might have some interest in Gardner Minshew from other teams out there. So we'll dive into that possibility as well. All right, let's bring Geoff Mosher in for Football at 4 here on the Sports Bash Live on 97.3 ESPN as the bye week is officially in the books. Geoff Mosher, what's going on, man?
Mike, how you doing, buddy?
Survived the bye week, got Dallas and Washington. Dallas wins that game, and now it sets up, a 5-way tie for the number 7 seed in the NFC for that number 7 spot. Washington currently has it. Minnesota's next, then Philadelphia. You got Atlanta and New Orleans. I mean, this thing is going to be a mess these next couple of weeks.
A lot of traffic on the 6 and 7 highway there. You got about 6 cars trying to merge into one lane.
Yes, you do. Washington left that game yesterday. I mean, the final score would say it's close. I mean, they were getting beat up. They got beat up. They lost some injuries in the game. I mean, did you see anything from Washington? Because a lot of times styles will make fights, and there's times where you say, hey, this team matches up pretty good with them. When you watch Washington yesterday, what was your takeaway with their matchup coming up this weekend?
Yeah, and full disclosure, I didn't get to see the game live as it was happening. I was taking a true bye weekend off with the family, but from what I've observed since, obviously the Washington offensive line had a whole lot of trouble protecting Tyler Heineke, specifically protecting against Micah Parsons.
Yeah.
And when the Washington has been successful before leading up to the Dallas game, they've been able to run the ball well and set up manageable third downs for Tyler Heineke, who can move around the pocket a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But it seemed to me that Washington was they were not able to move the ball very well offensively. And then they gave up some big plays, both on offense and defense, and got behind, as you just mentioned, got behind a hole early, which takes that ability to neutralize the opponent with the runaway when you kind of get jumped on like that.
Most you look at, and by the way, Washington leaves the game. They had some injury issues. Jonathan Allen tested positive for COVID. He could miss the game on Sunday. So with the way Washington's going, what about Philadelphia entering this game now? It seems that they are about as healthy as they can be, save for the guys who are out for the rest of the season.
Yeah, well, we've got what I would call a very interesting 24 to 36 hours coming up here because – well, the attention right now at the moment is going to go to Washington and Jonathan Allen already going on the COVID-19 list. The Eagles are coming off a bye, which means they've got players who presumably were traveling all around the country and coming back, from wherever they were over the bye, and they all obviously will have to get tested. I'm sure that is going on today. And so tomorrow we should find out their COVID-19 status. So I would think, if not later tonight. So maybe, and I'm not saying I know if anybody tested positive. I'm just saying that naturally you have all these people scattered across the country coming back. You hope that everyone comes back and tests negative, but we'll have to see.
Yeah.
As far as injury situation, I think the big question mark is still Jalen Hurts because the ankle injury was severe enough to keep him out of a game. And when you have if it's a high ankle sprain, and I don't think they've actually come out and said it, and maybe they have, but sometimes that takes more than just a week or two to get over. So we'll have to see, and they really won't practice until Wednesday. how he's doing, and be able to give us more information on whether they realistically expect him to start against Washington.
Yeah, I know that, most people just assume, too, that Hurts will be back and that he'll be ready to play. I don't know. Do we have any understanding that if they played this week, would he have been ready?
We don't have an understanding of that. And that's, some of that is intentional. They're not trying to advertise it. And some of that is just because, obviously, most of it's because they were not there. And I wouldn't be surprised, I don't know this for a fact, if Jalen had to stay kind of back to continue to get treatment on the ankle throughout the course of the week because of it. But I think we have a lot to find out. We will definitely know more on Wednesday. And if there's some seed of doubt there, I think that's going to carry through the week. And you're going to wonder, I don't know who had on their bingo card in 2021 football a potential Gardner Minshew Kyle Allen matchup there in week whatever it would be 15. Although it sounds like the news from Washington is that Heineke will be all right, but who knows these days,
Yeah, I know. Allen was in there late in the game. He fumbled that ball. I don't know if it was an actual fumble or not. They looked at it. They called it a fumble, but Allen was the one in the game in the big moments of that game, so we'll see. What is your understanding of where Brandon Brooks might be?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's kind of something we on Inside the Birds have really tried to figure out. And just like everybody else, we're beholden to what Nick Sirianni has said. Now, what Nick Sirianni has said up until this past week was that there is no update, and there's no timetable. What he said right before in his last press conference, before the bye, he said there will be an update. So very curious to hear in his next press conference what he has to say, because I would imagine that if he's ready to play or healthy and can practice this week, he would slide right back there at right guard. I think it was somewhat of a question when Jack Driscoll was playing because they were on such a roll and he was playing well, and he represents the future of the offensive line in some capacity, as opposed to Brandon Brooks, who does not. But now that it's Nate Herbig out there at right guard, and interestingly, them signing LaRaven Clark to through next year, so it looks like they're adding depth to their O-line. It makes me wonder what the situation is with Brandon Brooks.
Yeah, that's an interesting point you make, is that even though he hasn't played at all since week 2, I guess is when he got hurt against San Francisco, would he just go right back in there and be ready to go over these last 4 weeks of the season? And if he's playing at the level that he typically plays at, this guy, he's an amazing spectacle considering he's gone through 2 Achilles tears and has really not missed a beat when he's played. How much better would their offensive line be with a healthy Brandon Brooks?
Well, that's where you say a healthy Brandon Brooks, you have to wonder about. A pectoral injury is difficult. Javon Hargrave had one last year on the second or third day of training camp that forced him to miss pretty much all of training camp. And that occurred in the weight room, as I reported back then. And why it's complicating is because unlike maybe an Achilles or doing something else that once you get a certain, past a certain recovery point, you can start ramping up exercise and doing different things. When you have a pec issue, it's my understanding that weightlifting, your weight training and physical training can be a difficult thing there because you're not trying to re-aggravate it. So you may have to be off the weights and the weight machine for quite a while. Now you can probably run and do things to keep your conditioning up, but you do wonder about your ability to maintain your strength, your power, and your upper body acumen, which is very important for an offensive lineman. And if you remember last year, Javon Hargrave did not really have a very good September. It was about 6 or 7 weeks before he started to play like a good interior defensive tackle. And so I would wonder that even if quote unquote medically cleared to play or healthy, if Brandon Brooks would just be a little bit behind the 8 ball compared to everybody else who's been out there for the last 2 weeks on the offensive line. I'm sorry, last 2 months.
Right. Moshe, another thing that's interesting with this game, I think, first of all, let me ask you, do you believe that this game is essentially you have to win this game if you want to realistically make the play? I know we've talked about in the past, they'll be mathematically still alive, but you're looking at only 3 games left in the year. You're only 1 game back, but then the tiebreakers really start to pile up against you. So if you're going to lose to Washington, it almost can't be this one.
Well, that's a good question. I feel like in order for them to make the playoffs, they've got to win 3 of 4 games. Mm-hmm. How they win those 3 or 4 may not be relevant.
Okay.
I think you definitely at least have to take one from Washington. You're right, because you're competing with them for that 7th spot. And if you lose both,
if you get swept by them, that's 2 losses
you're
anyway.
done.
You're done.
Right. But could they lose this game to Washington, then win out and potentially still make the playoffs? Maybe. There are some teams that we haven't talked about because they were slumping, but now seem to have gotten their act together a little bit. Like New Orleans is an example. They're in that mix, and we don't really refer to them much, but they've got Taysom playing better at quarterback, and they've got Alvin Kamara back. And I look at their schedule.
They got their lineman back too, Armstead.
That's right, the lineman too. And you look at their schedule, and you think, they can win at least 2 of their next 4. I think Carolina's still on it. I think Atlanta might be. I forget who's on it. There are a lot of division games. So, I mean, if they're going to win 3 or 4, that's just another, team or 2 or 4 that you got to compete with. So,
and the other team I think that's interesting all of a sudden is Seattle, who is only a game back, and they're 5-8. So when you say 5-8, it makes you feel like they're just so far out of the mix. But they've now won 2 games in a row. They play the Rams, the Bears, the Lions.
Right.
And the Cardinals, who could be wrapped up by week 18, who knows? But, Seattle to me, is kind of still interestingly in this thing.
Yep. And then there's this kind of ancestral element where maybe the Saints don't do well and they lose a couple of the games. They're out of it, but they play the Falcons among their last 4. And so the Falcons have the 49ers, which is tough because 49ers are playing well, but you never know. But then they have the Lions, the Bills, and the Saints. The Bills have been playing terribly. I don't expect Atlanta to beat the Bills, but again, you just never know. If they win 3 of 4, then the Eagles have to win 3 of 4 just to make the tiebreaker come into play.
Well, the
Eagles only win 2, if Atlanta finishes a game a win higher than the Eagles, and Atlanta's in, obviously.
And the odd part here is this is where Josh asked me earlier, which of the games this week was the one that outside of that the Dallas game affected them the most. Now, San Francisco won. That moved them to 6.
Right.
But to me, it was really Minnesota beating Pittsburgh because
Definitely.
Minnesota has all sorts of wonky tiebreakers. They've got the common opponents who – when did the common opponents become higher on the depth chart than the conference record? The conference record is the same, though. So if Philly beats – this is interesting, Moshe. If they both go 3-1, and Philly's 3 includes Dallas, they would have the same record against common opponents. They would then go to their conference record, and that would be the same. The next tiebreaker, which is like the 5th tiebreaker, it only goes to 7. Do you even know what the 5th one is?
After conference common opponent, is it total points score?
It is strength of victory.
A strength of – oh, my God. I wouldn't even know how you evaluate strength of victory.
Well, right now, Minnesota's strength of victory is significantly higher than Philadelphia.
I would
Philadelphia's
imagine.
best win is against Denver.
Right.
And Minnesota's best win, they beat Green Bay. So
yeah, beat Green Bay, right.
Their strength of victory is like 465, and Philadelphia's is like 385, something to that effect. So
yeah,
Minnesota winning and them staying in the mix – they have so many tiebreakers over Philadelphia that could be something that ends up, sticking its ugly head in the mix here.
Yeah, Minnesota is, I agree with you. That win over the Steelers that they tried really, really hard to give away on Thursday night, but still managed to escape with the win anyway, put them in a pretty good spot. Now, they lost to it's amazing that you can come out and beat the Steelers like that after losing to the Lions just 4 days earlier, but that's kind of the NFC these days. So you look at their schedule, and Minnesota has 2 games left against the Bears, 1 against the Rams, 1 against the Packers. So they should theoretically be 2-2. But if you could lose to the Lions, you can lose to any of these teams. But I don't want, it's kind of like the Eagles lost to Miami a couple of years ago. It doesn't mean that they're going to play that badly against bad teams all across the way. The one thing about the Minnesota Vikings, if we're being really fair and objective here and you compare them to the Eagles, they're a better team than the Eagles. I mean, they have a better passing offense. They have better receiving weapons. They have a better running back. Maybe their running game might not be equivalent to the Eagles, but they have a way more dynamic running back. They're getting, I think, a little bit healthier. I know they were besieged by injuries in the middle of the year.
It's a clear indication, though, Moshe, of their offensive line is what holds them back. Minnesota's offensive line is dreadful, and that's why they stink. That's why from week to week they're so inconsistent. Like, They have Justin Jefferson. The Eagles would love to have Justin Jefferson. And by the way, they could have had Justin Jefferson, but they
So I've heard.
Right? And even having this great piece in Justin Jefferson, they are in the same spot as Philadelphia is. Go figure.
Right. And so because their offensive line is inconsistent, and because the Eagles, right, you would say the second most important, because their quarterbacking is inconsistent and their pass game is inconsistent, they have lost against virtually any decent team that they've played, and that's why they're in this position. So it's it's the NFL for you.
Absolutely. Obviously, I want to get your thoughts on John Gannon and this defense over the Final Four. That might be the most unknown to me about this team moving forward.
Certainly is.
I feel like I know what the offense is or wants to be or what they're good at. I'm not sure I know what the defense is good at or what they want to be.
Right. I mean, I compared it to kind of Jonathan Gannon to kind of like a turtle who, for the first 7 weeks, he just stayed in the shell. And then gradually he would poke his head out a little bit and see what the other world out there is like. And certainly you've seen that over the last few weeks in some occasional blitzing like he did against the Broncos and Saints, and a little bit against the Giants, almost none against the Jets. And I just wonder what kind of approach he's going to take to a guy like Taylor Heineke, who's not a bad or a terrible quarterback. He's not a great quarterback. The Eagles have had this weird thing where they seem to be playing either really good quarterbacks or just bottom 5 ones. But I mean, it sticks out to me that when you look at the Eagles' wins, their last 4 wins have come against Zach Wilson, Trevor Siemian,
who was awful yesterday, by the way.
He was Trevor Siemian, the Broncos, Teddy Bridgewater, and Jared Goff. Now, Jared Goff himself is actually not a terrible quarterback as much as the jokes are. I mean, he beat them last year as a Rams quarterback. But that Lions team is so terrible that you can't really legitimize some great. They beat a bad team. They beat a winless team at the time. So their last 4 wins have really come against teams that are like, a quarterback. So I don't know how that relays or parlays to Heineke, who can be pretty good some games and not so good others. But I just don't know what to expect from Jonathan Gannon.
What happened?
Force the issue or just sit back there and think that the front 4 gets it done?
And another question, what Washington has done the last couple of weeks, Moshe, is they've tried to run the ball. They basically tried to do what the Eagles did and just say, hey, we're going to run.
Right.
So if they want to run the ball and kind of stick to that, you look at that the Eagles have not been great against the run this year. They were good against the run in years past under Jim Schwartz, but this year
that's right.
They have not been a good run-stopping team.
No, they haven't been a good run-stopping team. And the Broncos, we go back to that game. The Broncos were able to run the ball really well. They just fell behind, and Bridgewater was not very good at it. The Giants did not run the ball well, which was a good sign for the Eagles defense. I tend to think Washington, no matter what, will come out and try to get their run game going and get Antonio Gibson going. I think they're getting J.D. McKissick back for the game, or at least it seems like there's some optimism about that. So that's some pretty good, diversity to their run game. And plus he can catch the ball out of the backfield. Those guys have hurt the Eagles as well this year. Running backs and tight ends, any team that really focuses on that seems to have a good kryptonite for the Eagles. And I think that Washington is that kind of team.
All right, Geoff Mosher, Football at 4, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Really, the Eagles have come too far at this moment for the people out there who are like, I don't want to make the playoffs. They're in this thing that's 6-7, whether you like it or not. They're kind of there. I guess the one question, there was a report this weekend. Obviously, Hurts is going to play, but that teams were calling about Gardner Minshew. Right, one of the teams that was listed was Carolina. They called to see what the compensation would be. Obviously, they didn't like the compensation, or maybe they would have Gardner Minshew. But there was, in the report, it suggested that the Eagles could be getting a lot of calls this offseason for Minshew. Would he be a guy that they would be interested in moving again?
I mean, I don't know why the Eagles would trade Minshew unless they got a really good offer. And I consider a good offer a 4 or higher. And I have a real skepticism about a team giving up a 4th-round pick or higher for Gardner Minshew unless he gets on the field again this year and plays well, because we've seen that. The quarterback who kind of gets hot we've seen Matt Flynn throw 6 touchdowns in a game for the Packers in relief of or just starting for Aaron Rodgers, and then go get signed by the Seattle Seahawks, and then they don't even play him because they draft Russell Wilson, right? We've seen the Rob Johnsons, or you just see guys get like Nick Foles, go out and set the world on fire and then wind up getting a contract elsewhere. So perhaps that could happen with Minshew. So that leads me to believe a little bit, Mike, that they're not going to play Jalen Hurts unless he's 100%, or at least, capable of going out there and making plays. I think that they will be very judicious in whether or not they play Hurts based on his injury status.
Yeah, I think that story, obviously it's not happening now. I mean, they're not getting calls today, but somebody kicking the tires saying, hey, this all – it just goes to show how many different ways there are to try to find a quarterback, or what teams are trying to do to get quarterbacks. When you are a franchise that might say, you know what, it's almost like the Eagles to me. We had this conversation in the 3 o'clock hour, which where they are as an organization motion. It's like, are these 4 games? How much do these 4, like we say last year, he played 4 games. I don't know enough about a guy in 4 games. We're saying now we don't have enough. So 4 more games, is that all of a sudden going to unlock the answer to how we feel about this guy? Like, I feel like this answer at the end of the year is going to be incomplete still.
It's funny. We had that conversation on Inside the Birds, how people keep saying, well, you got to give him the year, And then all of a sudden you look up and you say, well, there's really only 4 games left. How much more? But at the same time, by the same token, Mike, 4 games, I know there's an extra game now, but in a 16-game season, 4 games is a quarter of the season. So 4 games 2 years ago was crucial to the Eagles, and watching Carson Wentz go from a guy who was really struggling to putting the team on his back and going 4-0. So I don't want to discount the type of improvement, especially against division teams, that a quarterback can make, because he's seeing these teams twice now. So he's making adjustments. He's adding to that coaching. And I do think it can be important for a guy like Jalen Hurts to get that extra evaluation time in. At the end of the day, is it going to make a big difference? I don't know. I think it could if he plays really well, and you have seen developments in certain areas of his game. So, but to me, to get back to Minshew, he's not your starting quarterback next year, but he's a really good backup. So why would you, if you're the organization that has touted having the really good backup who's cost controlled, and you have him for this year and next year, even if you're going to be on to a newer quarterback next year, a veteran guy, whether Watson or Wilson or whatever, why wouldn't you still want to have Gardner Minshew there as your backup?
I agree, especially at his price. I mean, hey, you're going to get a mid-round. I think the report, it was Ian Rappaport, by the way. I couldn't think of who it was, but he mentioned it yesterday on the NFL Network, which was the Eagles could be asking for a mid-rounder, which is like 3rd, 4th, 5th. Is getting a 3rd, 4th, or 5th pick more important to the value that the Eagles put on their backup quarterback position? I would suggest no, right?
Well, a 3rd. I'm doing a 3rd. If you're giving me a 3rd for Gardner Minshew, I will personally drive him if I'm Howie Roseman to whatever franchise wants to give me a 3rd round pick.
A 4th, 5th, or 6th.
Yeah.
Or a 4th
definitely
or 5th.
Not, a 6th to me is not, because that's what you paid to get him.
That's what you paid to get him.
Yeah, a 5th. I don't know.
I just think the question
you got me thinking of 3rd and 4th, but I don't know about anything lower than that.
I just think the big thing is how much do these I would say this. Josh Allen, his first 2 years in the league, if you were in Buffalo, you would suggest he's not our guy. He's not the guy. His 3rd year, for God's sakes, he threw 37 touchdowns and had 10 interceptions. He went from a 58% completed pass to 69%. If you judged him off the 2 seasons that he played, you would have said, get rid of this guy. And I'm not suggesting Jalen Hurts is Josh Allen, but if he goes from where he was in those first 4 games to playing a whole season, gets another offseason, and enters the 3rd season of play, who knows what he might be in that 3rd season. And I would say with the draft capital you have, put more pieces around him and then figure him out.
You could do that. Certainly could. If the Eagles were that franchise, I would say, hey, that's good patience and good franchise building. But the Eagles aren't always that franchise, and they may wind up getting cajoled into it because there's no better options that are available to them. That'll be some great offseason conversation.
All right, bye week is over. Eagles Washington football team. Listen to it here on Sunday on 97.3 ESPN. Geoff Mosher and the Inside the Birds guys. Check out the podcast wherever you listen to your podcast, Apple Pod, Spotify, Google Podcasts. And, of course, tomorrow, Football at 4 with Andrew DeCecco is back. Geoff Mosher, take care, man.
All right, talk to you Wednesday.
All right, that's Jeff. And, of course, Football at 4 is powered by the Inside the Birds podcast, and it is brought to you locally by Caesars Entertainment Group of Atlantic City. Come experience the ultimate sports destinations all season long. Wild Wild West, Tropicana, Harrah's Resort, Atlantic City. Book your game day experience today at Caesars.com. I am Mike Gill. This is the Sports Bash.